press box. Michael, we have a lot of things to get to today. And by the way, this podcast is on the Alive and Social Network with all the other podcasts, Jeff Dubay, Rusty Gatenby, all of my other friends who are on the network. Michael, no place to start today other than the sad news of J.P. Parisi passing away.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we knew was coming, and sadly, came way, way too soon. He was diagnosed about a year ago, and I was just reading the story that I wrote back in September, and he talked about hopefully lasting 2 or 3 years. Wanted to actually last until the next Olympics to watch Zach play again, and it just for some reason it just didn't it just didn't go. I mean, he didn't want to do chemotherapy to begin with, and the family really talked him into it. He had survived prostate cancer in 1999, and he didn't want to do it, and the chemo this time really created a lot of illness with him, some infections and things like that. He was in the hospital for a month, and Zach confided me about a month ago that JP had decided that he wasn't going to do chemo anymore. So Zach knew this was coming, and last Thursday, which I think is New Year's Day, they converted his den into a hospice, and Zach was in Dallas the other day, and you could just I had found out right before the game that he was put in hospice, and I saw Zach working on his sticks, and you could just tell he was in another world, and in agony, and then after that game, he absolutely beat himself up for the way that he's been playing the last couple of weeks, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And we're interviewing Yo, and again, I couldn't get it out of my head, and just coincidentally, when I was leaving the back up to the press box, Zach was walking about 30 feet in front of me, and again, it was like one of those things I just couldn't, I just heard him ripping on himself for the way he's playing, and all along I know what he's going through. And so I kind of ran up to him and just, asked if he'd talk about it, and that's when he kind of opened up about how dire things were, and so now you just hope that for he and the rest of the family that they can think about the incredible memories that they had with their dad and their husband, and for years, and kind of live through that.
Cancer tends to touch all of us in some way, and I've had loved ones stricken with cancer. Last night, I'm at Kieran's Irish Pub doing my normal Wednesday deal, and Terry Ryan's my guest, the Twins general manager, and he had cancer, and he, it knocked him out. And this is one of the hardest working people, most diligent people I've ever been around. Knocked him out of action for a long time. He was telling me last night he still has trouble with his salivary glands. Mm-hmm. He really can't taste many foods. There are very few foods he can really taste. He can't eat anything too hot because it could burn his tongue without him even knowing it. I mean, it's not to go too big picture here. We'll get back to telling J.P. Parisi stories here in a little bit, but it is amazing with all the money that's been pumped into cancer research. My daughter works at American Cancer Research Institute, out in D.C. or something like whatever it's called. It's amazing that we have not been able to fight back against that disease. I mean, we still all lose people to cancer every year. Yeah,
and you do wonder if it's just going to get worse with just the amount of crap in our foods and our air, and phones up to our ears, and all this stuff that's essentially just brutal for us, and it is. It's just. It stinks,
or
man.
For those of us who find themselves in high stress situations. Yeah. Not that I'm thinking about anybody in particular, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't know. I just again, knowing that this was coming, it's still just so hard. I just feel so badly for both Zach and Ryan, and these guys are so. We talked about this on our recent podcast. Is that we all actually it might have been the last one when I was kind of trying to. I was trying to just almost hint to you just how this was coming, and we all expect them to just be these robots because they make millions of dollars and they put on the ice, and and they're strap on the jerseys, and you're supposed to forget about everything on the outside world, but they're human beings just like all of us, and I think Zach Parisi, in his words the other day in my article, really explained very succinctly why this has been tough for him. Besides the fact that the team stinks and that coming to the rink has has not been a solace because it almost is creating more heartache in both he and Ryan Suter's life. The reason why this has been tough for him is that if you remember in my original article that I wrote in September, Zach talked about how he just wanted to make this season about working hard and playing well with his dad having the ability to watch him, maybe for the final time, and how much that meant to him. And his words at the end of that story are so heartfelt. And then all of a sudden, if you think about the fact that Zach's dad basically only came to 1 or 2 games all year.
Yeah.
And so, when Zach comes to these rinks, it's like that's the other thing that he's thinking about is his father's not here. And as he said, it was like a punch to the gut when he said it. He said, this was kind of our thing.
Yeah.
And his point is that this is the bond that he shared with his dad. And he hasn't been able to talk to him about games. He hasn't been able to talk to him about the season. He hasn't been able to look at him after a game down by the locker room. And this is somebody that the first 2 years with the Wild was always around. Just you always saw him around. And so I feel bad for them. And Ryan was saying this morning, and Zach has said it to me recently too, that it is a blessing that they did get to sign, that they did sign here, because at least for the last 2.5 years, both Bob Suter and JP Parisi were able to watch their kids play up close and personal. They were able to spend a lot of time with their dads, and so that at least they got those 2.5 years. Where it would be so much harder if they were in another city.
I didn't know JP well. I knew him well enough to say hello to him and chat with him. The one time I had an extended conversation with him was in 2012. The North Stars were having a reunion, so I set it up to have lunch out with JP, and it was by he's living in Zach's house,
right?
And he asked me not to write it at the time, but he was basically drove up in a nice Cadillac, and he comes in and says, "Hey, don't tell anybody, but Zach gave me that car. He's a good boy, And the stories he told about playing in the old NHL, and playing in Canada growing up, and playing in the Summit Series, it was like Slapshot come to life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolute balls out, physical, violent, take no prisoners on the ice, and then go drink 18 beers and tell stories later. He was just a great character, and one of the things that really struck me is here's a guy who only by a kind of a bizarre series of events does he end up in Minnesota. Basically he told me that he's a 16-year-old playing in a men's league, and in the next to last game of a series, some guy hits him in the head. Michael Russo's phone is always going off these days. It's no big deal. This is a podcast. We're allowed to have ambient noise. So the next to last game of a series, some guy smacks him in the head with his stick, because that's the way hockey used to be played, right? And Parisi is going into the finals, and his coach begs him not to retaliate. He says, "We need you to win this game." And Parisi, against his own better judgment, doesn't retaliate, and he ends up scoring like 4 goals, has 2 assists, his team wins, and then there happened to be a Boston scout in the stands that day. He said, if I had beat that guy up in the first shift, I might not have ever gotten drafted.
Right.
So that guy drafted, he ends up with the Oakland Seals or whatever, some team, and he ends up getting an argument with that coach, which forces a trade, which ends up leading to the trade that lands him in the North Stars organization. And then, after all this stuff, he ends up going to dinner with going out to like lunch in Boston one day. He sees a teammate sitting at a table with 2 women. He walks over to their sisters. One of them was the 2 millionth North Star fan, 2 millionth person to walk through the gates over at Met Center, and he ends up marrying her and being in Minnesota the rest of his life.
Yeah. I just want you to see this. I don't know if you remember this, but this is JP Parisi in the Summit Series. Check this out.
Tom Reed just told me this story downstairs.
Yeah, wait till you see this. Wait till you see it.
Yep. He basically looks like he's going to decapitate the official. Think about if somebody did that today, you know? But back then, it was just part of being a character almost.
If you want to see what I'm talking about, just go to YouTube, and it's YouTube Jean-Paul Parisi 1972 Summit Series Game 8, Game Misconduct, and you'll find what I'm looking at.
Tell me about the time that the JP had a missing interview with you.
Yeah, that was the same September interview, and so what happened was I had known all summer that he was diagnosed. I hate to say it like this, but we were at development camp, and I ran into JP, and it was just obvious that he had cancer, that he was going through chemo. He was wearing a fedora, and it just was clear to me that he didn't have hair. And so, I respectfully obviously didn't say anything, but I did, ask around and found out what was going on. And a couple months later, I'm just shooting the breeze with Zach after practice, and I just again, you could just tell that he's strained, and so I just said to him, I do know what's going on, and do you think that JP would be interested in me writing, an article on what he's going through? And because also nobody in Minnesota knew, and he's such a popular and beloved figure here for what he's meant to this game here in Minnesota, which, I'm a transplant, but it didn't take long for me to figure out even before Zach came here how important JP was to this community and to Shattuck and things like that. So Zach said I'd be very willing to do it, but I don't think my dad will because he's not doing well right now and things like that. And so I'm like, no problem, just ask him whenever you feel like it, and it's something we'll talk about, and if he doesn't, no problem. And literally, like 45 minutes, an hour later, I was meeting with Chris Miller, my editor, that day to plan training camp stories because I was going out of town that weekend, and I'm telling him about this, and I don't think that he'll do it, but Zach was into it, and I'll just let you know. And as I'm having lunch with Chris, Zach texted and said he was that JP was willing to do the interview. So that next couple days later, I got a text from Zach basically setting up when I'd meet with him. Meet with JP. I was going to do the separate interviews separately because Zach didn't want to do it with his dad because he knew how emotional he'd get. And so JP and I were supposed to meet before during one of those octagon skates to basically watch Zach play. It was before training camp, like September 8th or 9th. And I'm in the stands just waiting for JP, and he never shows up. And I'm just like, oh, that's weird. He never shows up. So downstairs after the game, after the skate, I'm interviewing players, and Zach comes out of the locker room, and he goes, hey, did my dad text you? And I'm like, no. And he goes, he was rushed to the hospital this morning, and we're going to have to probably put off this interview. And I'm like, oh, no problem. Don't worry about me. And 6 p.m. that night, it's either that night or the next night. I'm just kind of laying on my couch, and phone rings, and I look, and it's JP Parisi calling. So I'm like, hello? And he's like, Michael Russo, Jean-Paul Parisi. And I'm like, hey, how are you? He's like, I am so sorry for standing you up. And I'm like, don't worry about it. I hear that you've been sick. Why are you worrying about me right now? He's like, I just couldn't get out of my head that that made you wait. And I'm like, oh, please, So that was him, and and then what happened is, like 3 days later, Bob Suter passed away and it happened while we were at Octagon Skate, and Becky Suter came running in there, and you just knew something was wrong right away. And I was supposed to have lunch with Zach that day, and Zach was obviously a little broken up after the skate, and asked if we could put it off, and then we talked 3 or 4 days later in a real emotional interview in Eden Prairie at this deli there, and then we kind of out of respect for what the Suters were going through, really held that story until the end of the month, until it was perfectly okay to a little distance between it. But it's just to me again. I didn't know JP very, very well, but that was always the way that I always took him. It's like, he's just like a heart of gold, and every time I saw him, I can't even tell you every time I saw him how many times he would tell me, he's like, I have so much respect for you, he had this way of just, you kind of walked away and you just felt proud, like you felt like, he had this way of just making you feel better about yourself, there are times in this business that you just feel like you're doing a crummy job, you're not working hard enough, you just wrote a shitty story, and then you run into JP and he's like, it's just love reading you, like stuff like that, and just like JP Parisi saying this to me, just I don't know, it just and it just I don't know, it says everything about him and the family, so.
I talked to Tom Riederwild this morning, some of it kind of off the record, and then some he did an interview with FSN, and we kind of piggybacked on that and talked about it. And he just paints such a great picture of these guys being in their prime, playing in the NHL, not making much money, not being very pampered, and just loving life. He talked about they stayed in Holiday Inns. They stayed in Howard Johnson's. Yeah. Where I've stayed in Howard Johnson. That's a scary experience. Tom also pointed out today. He said, in those days, you didn't fly on a chartered jet the night of the game to go to the next city or to go home. You usually stayed in the city where you played. So these guys would play the game, and 9:30 the game's over. They go shower. And here they are. They're in Montreal, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. They're going out on the town.
Yeah.
As Tom put it, we would find a library to spend some time in.
Right.
And it reminded me of JP telling me the story of one time he's in Denny's with one of his teammates, and some guy starts harassing him, and his teammate stands up and just beats the guy to a pulp. They end up in jail in Philadelphia, and having the general manager's got to come bail them out at like 4 a.m. That's old-time hockey.
Yeah, it wasn't on Twitter after
No,
they
it
were
was
arrested. It is amazing. I mean, when JP was on that father-son trip, that incredibly, and that was a big part of that September 28th article. And if you don't know the article I'm talking about, I think that if you go into the obituary that we wrote today on StarTribune.com/wild, it's under related content. But JP really. I mean, this father-son trip that Chuck Fletcher put together for him last year was, at the time, we didn't know he was diagnosed with cancer. And, it seemed weird that he was on the trip. But the reason why is that in that story, Zach finds out that he's diagnosed with cancer. He has to go to Edmonton the next day. He doesn't want to go. He gets on the plane. He's numb to everything. Ryan Suter comes up to him, "What's wrong?" And Zach breaks down on the team plane and tells him. And Ryan gets up on the team plane, like apparently while Zach was like sleeping, and goes up to Chuck Fletcher and tells him what's going on and says, "You have to arrange to have JP come on a trip. He's never been on a father-son trip. They weren't allowed to do this in New Jersey. He's diagnosed with terminal cancer. You've got to get him on." And they planned this trip at the end of the season at the perfect timing. If you think about the team was going belly up right then, to go to Arizona, LA, and Chicago. And so he... then when we were on that trip, I did another story on just JP's experiences being on that trip, and he talked about just what it was like to be staying at the Ritz-Carlton, L.A. and the Ritz-Carlton Chicago and the this Renaissance that we stay at in Glendale that's insane, that I love, and flying the first class. But he talks in the story about how just but nothing else has changed. It's still about the brotherhood, the camaraderie of being together as a team. And, they live a little nicer. They make a little more money. All these guys, if they were in a different era, would be a lot richer than they were. You just think about, Denny Potvin and Bobby Orr and what these guys would have made if they played in today's game. Guy Lapointe. And so, it's just one of those things where, when you listen to Tom Reed tell stories sometimes and JP, how much you just realize, what it must have been like back then. I remember, I grew up a little later than that era. I grew up in the early 80s, but I remember I told you this story on a podcast once about sneaking out of summer camp, out of day school, basically, to go watch the old Islanders come back from practice. And I still remember these houses that, like, Brian Trottier and Denny Potvin and Billy Smith and Clark Gillies and Bobby Nystrom and these guys lived. I don't think Bossy lived in this community. I mean, they were like just crummy little apartments in Woodbury in New York, and either Woodbury or Westbury, and you think about where these guys live now. And
it's all gated communities.
I was telling somebody the other day. When I first started covering the NHL just in the 90s, you go out after a game and you see all these players pounding beers, And now it's like recently, it's like, you just go into I go into and I see these guys at steakhouses drinking wine. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't even drink beer anymore. It's like, it's a different world now.
Absolutely. The things Tom said this morning, Tom Reed, obviously the Wild announcer, former North Star, and just one of the best people in the market, one of the great people. He told me some stories about Vietnam that I hadn't heard before. He said he and JP went over on a USO tour, and he said they spent the entire time playing pranks on JP. They put fake insects under his pillow and put a stuffed python like by the front of the door and made him run out. They said they had a pet monkey that was like leashed to a post, and they would take it off the leash and make it chase JP because JP was so afraid of it. Yeah. It just strike me as characters.
Yeah, it's funny. Tom Reed. It wasn't JP that was the practical joker. It was like they just terrorized JP. And Tom Reed was telling a story that he's told me before this morning. He was telling a story about how, this one time, JP was big, like, they have a big game tomorrow. And he might have told you this story. He's like, the North Stars had this huge game tomorrow. And he's like, bedtime, fellas, everybody to sleep. And they were in adjoining rooms, JP and his roommate and Tom Reed and his roommate. And so he basically kicks them out of their room, and JP closes the adjoining door, and Tom Reed realizes right away it never locked. So Tom Reed, the second he heard the click of the lights, he snuck into the room and just stood against the wall for 3 or 4 minutes as JP and his roommate, I don't know if it's Bill Goldsworthy or I forget who his roommate was, and waited to them to shut up, and that it was clear that they were going to bed. And then Tom gets on his hands and knees, sneaks between the two beds, and puts his hands under the covers and just grabs JP's leg as hard as he could. So JP says to whoever his roommate is, like, stop fooling around. And from the other bed, the guy goes, "What are you talking about?" And JP just absolutely, like, jumps out of the bed, like, absolutely freaking out. Like, what the hell happened here? And I guess that's stuff that Tom used to do to him all the time. Zach Parisi told me the other day in Dallas, and that was something I did not put in the article, but it was the eye-opener to Zach that his dad was about to die. It was his mom called him and said, your dad's wish is for Tom to do the eulogy at his funeral, and it was like, that was, man, I'm still, just thinking about Zach telling me this and his reaction. But Tom's been working on this for the last couple, 3 or 4 days, and my feeling is that this is going to be a laugh out loud eulogy. Yeah. It's going to really uplift everybody, because Tom's got these stories that are just, hilarious. And it's just the bond that teammates have with each other.
JP told me back then that he'd be standing next to Tom and the national anthem will be playing, and Tom would turn to him and say, I never play well when I hear this song.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty good line.
Yeah.
JP also told me that they used to call, like, one of their teammates, they said he was strong like a bull and smart like a tractor.
Yeah.
That was their way of ripping him.
Yeah.
So one day they're in practice, and Herb Brooks says, "Hey, get Deere out there. Get Deere out there." And they all look at him, "Deere? Who's Deere?" And Herbie looks at him and says, "John Deere, the guy you call the tractor." And he told me one other quickie little one. He said that one day Herb shows up to practice and says, "All right, I want everybody today, I want you to concentrate on doing the things that we talk about all the time, what things you're doing wrong. Today, I want to work on things you're good at."
Yeah.
And he said, JP said one of his teammates went over, sat down on the bench, and opened and closed the door for other people.
Yeah. Just real quick, I know I think we're going to a break here, but I was talking to Jonathan Taves this morning, and after we were done with the scrum, I was just shooting the breeze with Taves, and I might do my Sunday column on this now because very few teams have had a lot. Pittsburgh Penguins have had a lot of tragedies the last couple of years. Just weird stuff happen to them. Blackhawks have had some major stuff happen the last couple of years, and most recently, a couple days after we were in Chicago, their assistant equipment trainer killed himself. And Jonathan was just talking about how important it is for teams to just stick together and be families. And, Ryan Suter was talking about that today, about just, how important it is for them to embrace Zach when he gets back. And I think that's the cool part that a lot of us that don't play sports don't really experience, is just the fact that Zach will have this secondary, home that he's going to have here in support of of these teammates and the players. And, the Wild it's been an unbelievable season with Ryan's dad passing away and JP's. I mean, a month ago when I was in Tampa, Craig Leopold's mom died. It's just been.
Well, I just met this fall.
Yeah. I mean, you did a story about it about them a month ago, and so. That's the good part of professional sports is just that they really do have this secondary family here that will help support them, and I think Zach will appreciate that when he gets back.
That's Michael Russo. I'm Jim Souhan. We're going to turn the page now. We're going to take a quick break, then we'll come back and talk more about tonight's game against the Blackhawks and where the Wild are in general.
Hey everybody, Rusty Gatenby here. So you think you've got a bad commute? Michael Francis is a Minnesota
10-second countdown when we're coming back in.
But he works in California, Hollywood, California.
Like I said, once this is done,
Charlie, did you guys get
I'm going to let it roll and run down quick and throw some more change in the meter.
Great.
His boss is Steven Spielberg.
We are creating cocktail.
You going to hang around for the game, or?
So is Michael.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm covering tonight.
Together with his wife, Britt Kyla Francis, they have helped organize a one-of-a-kind charity event at the Mall of America Sunday night.
The Golden Globes, I think, of all the award shows is always
Tell me when I need to be back there.
Yeah, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Lively and often campaign fueled. That's right, they're bringing the Gold Globe experience to
I knew
you.
it was the whole
It's all the benefits.
I saw them up there. And then I saw you said it because Stan was like, oh, they weren't filming. And I was like, well, they were both up there. They weren't filming their stuff. Because he was like, they don't film all practice. And I was like, yeah, but once he started yelling. Well, no, because you could tell he was kind of.
And it's about 30 seconds now.
Hot spot.
In addition to the dinner and watching the show, there's going to be a few special moments within the show.
I'm gonna hit you with a couple.
It's a one-of-a-kind
Yeah, let's start with
Golden
that,
event.
and once we've
Check out the
gotten
red
to a
carpet
breaking
for
point with that, I'll
more
hit you some Twitter
information,
questions.
Check out the
and-
Rusty Gatenby review.
I actually thought Mike last year did an incredible job of maintaining his cool, even while his job was under fire, while his team was in trouble. Do you think that was calculated on his part yesterday, or did he reach a snap?
I don't know if you saw, but I pulled him aside after the skate this morning and chatted with him for a little while, and he swears it absolutely wasn't. Even the secondary slap. I didn't think the first was because I was watching practice.
Yeah.
And I saw how bad they were, and I saw it was. I was kind of. If you read my tweets before that, I was saying that he was barking and leading up to it. He pulled them aside at one point and, in a calmer way, went after them. And then all of a sudden, I'm watching Justin Falk put like 3 pucks in a row, and Andrew Brunette skates, and it was like freaking Yo just exploded and blew his whistle, and that's when all hell broke loose. So I really think it was genuine at the time. I definitely don't think he knew the camera was in the crowd because one, I say this with all respect, but this is not Montreal, Toronto, New York, Philly, Chicago. And I hate saying it like this, but most times at practice it's the 2 beat writers.
Yep.
It's not. There's no cameras here, and I knew that after the fact the KSTP was here, but I didn't know that they were filming practice, and I certainly had no clue that they had their camera isolated on Yo during this whole thing, which I'm glad they did because I was able to rehash exactly what not only what happened but what was said. Mm-hmm. So to me, it painted a more accurate picture of what happened. Other than my tweets, which, when you watch it again, I think, probably I went a little overboard because I was on the other side of the rink and just saw him slam his stick and cursing. And I heard the curse word.
You'd already had like 2 gallons of coffee.
Right,
You're going to overreact.
So,
it's going to work.
It was like one of those things. But I pulled Yo aside and he swore it wasn't calculated, that he just did flip his lid. And I said, well, I jokingly told him, I said, on KSTV, it looked like you might have gone up to Bruno. And he said, hey, it'd be good now to slam your stick against the wall. And he said, no. He goes, I went up to him and I told him, he goes, you guys are fucking running practice the rest of the show. I'm out of here. And that's when he left the ice. And so do we have to bleep this or no?
No, we don't bleep on the podcast.
Okay,
so you're in trouble now.
Well, because I was going to say, because I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah,
the
Evan took
producer
off.
has left.
we do that to producers.
Okay.
They tend to run away from us.
Because
by the way, you just joined forces with Mark Craig, who was very explicit on the first podcast I did with him.
Sports writers, we have gutter mouths. We
Yes,
live
we
in
do.
press boxes, locker rooms, and bars. So usually
it was really bad when I covered baseball. I really had to try to edit myself around my kids because I would come home talking like a ball player.
I remember. Oh man, I probably shouldn't say this because it's kind of gross. But I'm sitting in the press box. I don't know how I've never, knock on wood, cursed on the radio with much radio as I do. I'm sitting in the press box in Florida once, and David Neal from the Miami Herald is doing a radio interview in Pittsburgh. Okay, on one of their stations, and he's next to me, and Jeff Norton. He's on a rant about how bad Jeff Norton is, this defenseman, and all of a sudden I hear him go, his shot couldn't break fucking wind. He says this on the phone.
air?
On the
Oh,
air.
okay.
And then I look at him, and I know he's doing a radio interview, right? He's in Pittsburgh. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and it was like deer in headlights. Like, oh, my God, I just said that on the air. And then all of a sudden, they basically, like, cut the interview short and hung up. And he looked at me and goes, I don't think I'm doing Pittsburgh radio anymore. So.
Last time I'm in New York. I'm in the press box at Yankee Stadium. That's the day Blyleven drops the F-bomb on the air.
Oh, yeah.
And Blyleven walks out, looks at me and says, I just bleeped up by saying bleep on the air. I said, yeah, well, he just keeps saying it. And, of course, Bert, everything's a prank to Bert. Bert wanted to go back in and say it again as a joke. I said, Bert, no, give it a rest now.
I'm convinced that that's why also in our paper, like our policy is if they say like a four-letter word, we just can't use it.
No.
We cannot.
We can't even use suck.
We can't put in brackets like expletive or like whatever. Like in my other paper, you could actually put dashes or expletive or whatever, or you could change the word.
At the Star Tribune, we protect the children.
Yeah, but there was this great story. It was either the St. Pete Times or the Tampa Tribune about 15 to 20 years ago, where a high school writer was covering a soccer game, and the coach used the term bullshit. And this writer knew that his buddy was copy editing on that night. So in his copy, he put in brackets, he put bullshit, but he put dash, dash, dash shit in his copy. But the guy sent in his story at like 10:45, 11 p.m. on deadline.
Yeah.
So it was like at that point where they didn't read the story. And it got in the paper, and that guy was fired. So and the copy editor, I think, was suspended.
Yeah, well, you kind of earned that one, I think.
So that was a bad one. But anyway, so Mike says this wasn't orchestrated or calculated. I don't think it was. I think that if anything was orchestrated about it yesterday, I know it looked staged to people that weren't watching, but for people that saw the video after the fact. But I really genuinely don't think it was because, again, if it was staged, it was staged for the players, not for the media.
Right.
And but I will say that Mike is under stress. His team's not playing well. He did something similar in Arizona a couple of weeks ago, and he actually started practice early, almost so we wouldn't see it. And so, I just think that Mike's trying to push every button. If anything was orchestrated about yesterday, it was the fact that I think that when Mike woke up yesterday morning, and he saw that all the stories were painted on basically blaming everything on Darcy Kemper, that he now, with all the excuses going around with the mumps and the norovirus and the heartbreak of the team, I think he wanted to really remind his players, like, don't now use goaltending as a crutch. You guys have to be better if we're going to get out of this. Everybody on this team's got to individually be better and worry about their own games and stop pointing fingers and hanging their heads. And that was a depressed practice yesterday, man. It was a team that did everything they could to win the night before and didn't. And all of a sudden, there was just no talking in that practice. It was sloppy. The execution wasn't better. Guys weren't ready for drills. And I think Mike's blew his, the lid came off.
Again, he's been through tough times before, and this is the first time he's demonstrably in the open snapped like that. Is that the result of heightened expectations?
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, this is a guy that said that it's time to join the top tier this year, and they're certainly not that.
No.
So yeah, I think it is. Sorry. Actually, I'm forgetting that I can actually, who cares at this point? I can interrupt myself, right?
Yes, you can.
Do you mind? Anthony LaPanta just asked if I wanted Starbucks. Can I just make my order?
Yeah, and tell Anthony thanks for asking me too.
Okay, grande Americano with cream and a little Splenda. Okay. So this is.
By the way, Anthony might be the only person who drinks more coffee than you.
Yeah, that is true. He goes with the extra shot Americano,
yes, he does.
And he'll do it at 10 p.m.
He did that, back when I would work for FSN sometimes. He and I'd be at a Wolves game, and he would go get me an Americano right before opening tip. I wouldn't get to sleep till 4 a.m.
Yeah. It's luckily for me, our traveling media party between the Pioneer Press writer, who, by the way, might drink more coffee than me. He just doesn't talk about it as much. And Greenland LaPanta, man, we are all Starbucks-aholics, so it's all good. We all kind of take care of each other on the road.
All right. So
what was I saying?
Well, we've talked
the
about
expectations were huge.
Yeah.
And, I mean, this team was supposed to be better. They're absolutely not. There's probably a lot of valid, sometimes excuses are excuses, but sometimes they're
legitimate.
Valid. Yeah, I mean, it's just the case. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, going to Dallas the other day, I didn't expect them to lose 7-1, but I expected them to get their ass kicked. When you... it's so much. First of all, I think the league thinks that Dallas is like an hour from here. The Wild play in Dallas on second of back-to-backs like teams play between Winnipeg and Minnesota all the time. And then when you get to you just play a hockey game against Toronto, and you get to the airport, and you're at Signature where there's no seats to sit in, basically, and you find out your plane's not there because it's broken down, and they got to bring a new plane. Now everybody's just lying on the ground after playing a hockey game, and you finally get on, then you're flying through a storm. I know this is going to sound stupid, but all of a sudden you get in 3 a.m., as opposed to when teams come here from Winnipeg and get in at midnight. That's a big difference, and it just changes your routine. I said it the other day, but there is a rule in the NHL that there's an 8-hour rule that if all of a sudden you get in after a certain time, you're not allowed to skate. So then they couldn't start Backstrom because he couldn't take any shots that day. So they started Kemper when they probably didn't want to, and then it's like, I don't know. I mean, they just had no legs, and there's been stuff like that all season. Now, you got to thrive through it, or you can just blow your season away. But this has just been a weird freaking year, man. I mean, it started before the season with Bob passing away, and then the mumps, and then Zach's heartache, and he's human, and then the
Royce is going to rip
virus.
you for mentioning the mumps,
yeah,
man.
So I don't care. But again, it's just like it just almost seems like I said it to Yo a couple of weeks ago in a post game presser. Does it almost feel like it's not meant to be, man?
Yeah.
Then you have this Kemper situation where he can't stop a puck, then he leaves practice hurt, and now you're at this stressful time of the season, and you're left with Nicholas Backstrom and John Curry. I mean, let's be honest, it does not look good right now.
It does not. And I think the key stat of the season, I mean, there are a million stats out there. There's advanced metrics. You can break it down any way you want. To me, the key stat of the season is they're allowing the second fewest shots on goal. In other words, their defensive system works. Even with all the problems I've had, their defensive system works. And they have the second worst goals save percentage. I mean, that's the story. To me,
it is the story. You've never seen a Mike Yeo team that's given up this many goals. They're like 23rd or 4th in the league. I mean, they're giving up like 4 or 5 goals a night. I mean, I'm no gambler, but the Wild have traditionally been an under team, and you bet the over on the Wild almost every night, you're winning. This is a team that is just now. I will say, look, I talked to Chuck Fletcher this morning. And I will have a story on him tomorrow with some real, great stuff. As much as he says that they need more saves, and he puts a lot of this on Kemper and Backstrom, he also says that he's not stupid and has watched this team play the last month, and their defensive work has slipped, and their execution has slipped. I mean, how many times the other night, how many times every night do we watch the Wild go on odd man rushes and not get a shot on goal?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it really is. I mean, there are times where 4 or 5 times a game they get odd man rushes and don't get a shot. I mean, that is absurd. And so there's a game the other night where the Wild say they played well, and 3 different times in that game, odd man rushes with very skilled players, and they don't get a shot on goal. You get one of those, you probably, they go away, man. I mean, look, Zucker was incredible that game. But the Zucker-Pominville one, where Zucker probably passed to Pominville too early, and then Pominville passed it back a little too early, and you turn that game into 2-0 at that point. San Jose probably goes away after playing the night before in Winnipeg, and that's where the Wild don't do it well. Is these times where they get these power plays with a chance to tie, they don't score. How many times earlier this season their power play might be? I mean, their power play actually statistically since December 5th is like second in the league. Mm-hmm. But how many times from October 10th to December 2nd did that power play literally lose them games? And now their penalty kills started to take a dip. Their power play is better, but you have these games now where if you just make 1 or 2 plays, you probably are winning games, and they just don't do enough anymore.
You've covered other sports as well, and we're not always going to talk just hockey on this podcast when we're together. Let me hit you with two one national story, kind of one more general local story. The national story is the NFL comes out today and basically says that the investigator that they are paying to investigate them has decided that, yeah, maybe they could have done things a little bit better, but, it's okay. I mean, I don't know if you saw that, but the Mueller report is basically a whitewash.
Yeah.
It's basically a way of them saying, okay, yeah, the guy we paid is saying that we did okay with this.
Yeah.
Maybe could have done things a little bit better.
That is
unique? Do
No.
you think that's unique to the NFL, or is that
Not
just the
at
way
all.
leagues work?
Yeah, the NHL they paid the Levitt report. That was the big thing in the 2004 lockout, to go and audit all the teams to make sure that they were being up and up with their revenue stream, to get a salary cap. And of course, he comes out, Arthur Levitt, reputable name. He's like, oh yeah.
And so Mueller's a reputable name too, but
yeah.
you know who's paying you.
Absolutely, and that's why the all player unions always try to get neutral arbitrators involved here, rather than those being paid to they essentially or the perception is they're working for the team. I mean, you're not going to rip the people that are paying you.
Right.
It's kind of like the FSN thing. I mean,
Absolutely.
People get all mad, Royce in particular, of getting all mad that FSN's biased and homers. They're paid by the Wild, of course.
They're employees. They're team
they
employees.
Are. I mean,
that's
just
which is one of the reasons I don't work there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like one of those things. But although I will say that they don't, that's the cool thing with me. When I go on there, they give me no, in fact, to this morning, before it came out that JP died, the topic that Glenn Clymer and I were going to talk about on the air today is one of our point counterpoints. So we're going to do a unique thing on the pregame show. Now it's Ben's not on with me. It's just going to be me talking about JP for 3 or 4 minutes. But originally we were going to talk about one of our topics was most disappointing team in the league, and he was taking Boston and I was taking Minnesota, and I was going to hammer him, and FSN was fine with it.
Well, that's good.
So they don't. That's the good thing about me, kind of being. The kind of the outside guy, and what my role is supposed to be there is that they don't stop me from ripping on them.
Well, in my experience was they hired me in 2001, mostly to do twin stuff. Then I ended up doing general stuff. And at the time they hired me, they wanted me to be kind of the clear outside voice who could say whatever he wanted to say. And then they hired a certain producer who came in and wanted me to say what he wanted me to say, and I just quit.
Yeah.
I quit on the spot.
Right.
But that guy isn't here anymore, so you don't have to deal with that.
No, they treat me incredibly. I mean, they really do. Everybody, not just the on-air talent, but but everybody behind the scenes.
I liked pretty much everybody there except the one guy who I couldn't work for.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
He's not here anymore.
Yeah.
Let me give you kind of a general market question now. We came into the season, all of us who thought the Wild would be good talked about the young talent. And now you look around the market, and the Vikings have Teddy Bridgewater, who I think is going to be a very good NFL quarterback, and they have a lot of good young players. You have the Wolves, who are terrible, absolutely terrible. I was there last night, but Andrew Wiggins looked like he's going to be the real deal. You have the Twins, who have been terrible for 4 years, but they're high-end talent. Buxton, Sano, they both, I think, will be superstars. The other teams aren't very good, but they all have a lot of promise with their young guys. How promising now, at this point, do you think the Wild's young players are?
I still think that they're going to be good players. Now, are they ever going to be Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves? Absolutely not. I'll tell you that 100%. But I never thought they would be before. But I will say it is an interesting thing. If you think about our opening day story in the Star Tribune to advance the first Colorado game, we had a young gun story. And think about the 5 people in that story. Now, Jonas Brodin, I think, has had a great year. But, Mikhail Granlund, disappointment. Charlie Coyle, disappointment. Eric Holla, disappointment. And Nino Niederreiter, who was having a great start but has been a total disappointment the last month. The one guy that wasn't in the story is Jason Zucker, might be their best youngster on the team right now, 13 even-strength goals. He's been unbelievable in every, to me from the beginning. Now, I will say he wasn't in the story because we weren't 100% convinced that he'd make the team. And, the way it works in newspapers, there's a certain day that the Wild allows you to take, like, say, a photo to do some sort of portrait. And, at that point, with like a week and a half before the story was going to run, I just wasn't confident that he was going to make the team. So I decided that, he wasn't going to be included. And, I'm sure maybe he's using that as motivation. But their young kids have been absolutely disappointing this year. But I don't think that you just absolutely pull the plug on them. And I will say that a big part of my story tomorrow with Chuck Fletcher is he openly admits to me, and I wrote it in today's story, not using him as a source, so it actually gave me a little bit of relief that my story was accurate. But he openly admitted to me that he's looking for a goalie. And so, which also tells me that my external sources are good. And he's working hard right now to get a goalie. But one of his problems is that to get a kind of a big name goalie, which big name goalie is still pretty arguable, and I'm talking about Cam Ward or Cam Ward. How significant of an asset can you give up for a guy like Cam Ward when, first of all, he's coming off 2 inconsistent injury-plagued years in a row. He's 9 years after his Stanley Cup championship and Conn Smythe winner, and there's no guarantee at all that if Cam Ward's in net that you make the playoffs, right? So then you got to decide if you're Chuck Fletcher. All right, first of all, do I really give up a top prospect for a guy like Cam Ward? And 2 is if Cam's not going to save our season, then is there something better if we just wait, ride out the instability, even if it costs us a playoff spot, and go and deal with it either at the trade deadline or the summer when maybe you have a better pick of the litter out there? And that's what they're wrestling with right now. And he said, and I know he's working hard, and my hope is this story gets in before he makes a trade, because I will say every time I've seen him today, which has been 3 different times, he's been huddled in a corner with a freaking phone to his ear, and I almost want him slow down, I want to get this in the paper. But I will say that he told me that, look, this is a league that is very difficult to make something happen quickly, and he's been trying. And what his concern is that if they lose 3 or 4 more games and now they're 8, 9, 10, 12 points out, then you know what? It's not as enticing to give up assets for a goalie right now anyway. So he's under pressure here to make some sort of move quickly. I do think that if they're not telling specifics of what's up with Kemper. They think it's only going to be a week. Sounds to me probably a groin or something like that. But can you ride Backstrom for a week and deal with it, or do you have to go at least get a short-term guy in here now? These other guys, I know it's people are talking to me about Jonas Enroth and Michael Neuwirth, and there's no names out there that are to me enticing. Jonas Enroth, he's 5. What isn't he 5'10", 5'11"? You don't win with guys like that anymore. You really don't. And so this isn't the day and age of Mike Vernon and John Van Beesbrook anymore. Every goalie in this league is 6'5", 6'6", huge. Corey Crawford today, gigantic. Ben Bishop, 9 or something. 6'8" or 6'7". Kemper, 6'5". It's just not a league where you can have guys like that. So to me, every other guy out there right now are backups. And I don't, Niemi is the one name that really intrigues me. His Cup championship, not far off of it. I think he's pretty good, but I just don't think San Jose moves him. If you're San Jose and you think you can make the playoffs and still be a team that could, do something damage in the playoffs, are you going to put all your eggs in the Alex Stalock's basket right now? I just don't see that. So I don't see how they can get him right now. They might and that's the other thing, is that if the Wild are interested in Niemi and you could sign him in the offseason, well, you're not going to give up some crazy contract, crazy assets right now to get Cam Ward. So maybe at the end of the day, it's going to have to be an Enroth or a Neuwirth, and then you let them go, and that could be what they're wrestling with now. I'm now thinking in my own head is that you do have, if you have these other unrestricted free agents, then maybe you can try to get an Enroth in here now as a short-term fix. But and I have a feeling from talking to people in the organization that they don't look at a guy like Enroth as somebody that they'd want to be their future. So if that's the case, maybe you trade for somebody like that now, just to play for the rest of the year, let him go as an unrestricted free agent, and then go and sign Niemi or something like that. Okay, now I've confused myself. I'm going to have to listen to all this again to remember what I said.
Don't worry, I stopped listening 5 minutes ago, so I'm fine. Let me hit you some quick Twitter questions. We're coming near the end of
What's
the
goalie's name that I was just talking about? Just guess.
Jonas something. Anti something. Question from...
I can tell you Antti Niemi is finished, so don't you think that there's probably a good chance the Wild go sign him?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Jason Plant, Ion Vandy, tweets us a lot. His question is, have you noticed Kemper nursing something, or do you think this is new?
Mike said this morning that it was an aggravation of something. I haven't noticed him nursing. Yeah, you know what? Come to think of it, I have. Yep. And he has been wrapped up in the. Yeah, he has. He has been. I think he's got a groin.
Okay.
He's had, Koivu's dealing with the same thing. Actually, it's fun, man. It's funny that Jason just said that. Like suddenly, it popped. I have seen him wrapped up lately. Yep.
All right. What's reasonable to give up for Cam Ward?
I don't know.
And that's from Brian Durham.
The reason why I'm torn on that is because I have, not seen enough of Cam Ward the last couple years to believe that he is back to where everybody says he is. Everybody keeps on saying he's had this rebound year. I look, and the Carolina Hurricanes suck. Can I say suck?
You can say suck.
Okay, good.
Not in the paper, but you can say it on the podcast.
I'll say suck, but in brackets if you can change that to stink.
S-dash.
So I just don't know. Like, I don't trust that you. I think it would be absolutely stupid to go trade for Cam Ward and give up a Charlie Coyle or something like that right now. I really do. I mean, it depends on what type of player that they're going to want. The other thing is, if I'm Chuck on that, and this is where also it takes a little time, like, all my sources tell me, and these are pretty good sources in the NHL, tell me that that Carolina right now has a major ownership issue. And I talked about this recently on something. But their minority owner passed away, and they're actively, Peter Carmanos, who is the majority owner, has been desperately looking for a minority owner, and he has assumed pretty much all the money, all the debt, all the revenue, everything. But he doesn't want to be paying the full slate here. And so, like, to me, if I'm Chuck Fletcher and I have that, and I don't know if he knows what I know, I'm sure he does, I'm saying to myself, like, why should I give you a freaking prospect when I know that you want to dump his 6.3 next year? So, like, why should I give you, a legit guy? I mean, so I don't want to guess. I really don't. To me, we'll see what Chuck Fletcher does. I do believe that they're going to have to trade for a goalie here at some point. This isn't an aberration, man.
No.
Kemper's got a major, and this is a great kid. Trust me. Like, I like him. I think he's got the tools, but I do think he is complete. And this is, part of it is, to me, sympathetic, and part of me isn't. Part of me is like, hey, man, you held out for this one-way deal.
Yep.
Now this is what you get. The pressure's on you. When you held out for this one-way deal, you also knew that Josh Harding had broken the foot and that they were not starting Nicholas Backstrom, that you were going to be the guy. Well, this is what you get. When you're the number one guy, it's kind of what Mike Yeo said after the game the other day. Like, sorry, I don't want to take shots at his confidence, Yeo was basically saying, but this is what you sign up for when you play the loneliest position in sports. And so now the pressure has gotten to him. And there's no doubt about that. And the other night,
I thought the loneliest position in sports was working with Royce.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that you just look at the other night. Like, that's a game they should win. There's no excuse. And in my mind, I don't want to say he gave up 4 bad goals, but he, gave up 3. In my mind, I mean, I know first goal was unlucky, but make that save, and second goal. Short side off a faceoff. I know it's Pavelski, but as Pierre McGuire said on the broadcast when I listened to it again, they call that the AHL goal for a reason. Mm-hmm. Third goal, ridiculous hop off Jonas Brodin's stick. I know that he had to react to it last second. It's easy for me to say, but has been in the norm lately. Puts it right onto a stick in the slot. And fourth goal can't be scored, and he gives up that goal every game. I mean, I can't tell you how go into his game log and see how many times he's given up a 40 to 50 footer this year.
Mike Burgoyne, is Pominville movable?
Maybe. I would think this is the first of a 5-year deal, which might be tough. But at the trade deadline a couple years ago, a lot of teams wanted him. So, I mean, he might be movable. Of the veterans that can be of the veterans, I would say that he's the most. I like Mike Burgoyne too, because about a month ago I was like, you're going to give me a heart attack with some of your questions. When are they going to move Vanek? When are they going to move Koivu? Now at least he's getting. I've noticed like the last month, it's like he's gotten very much more to my mentality, where he's asking
Poor
guys.
guy.
I know he's asking things that aren't going to absolutely give me a coronary. But Pominville, I like Pominville because at least he shoots the puck, but he's having a tough year, man.
Yeah. Kind of combined questions from Barry Voigt and Brian Mighty Duck 33, I think it is. Basically, do you think at this point Mike Yo's job is in any jeopardy? And do you think Mike Yo changes lines more than the average NHL coach?
On the latter, no. You're seeing the guy tonight that does, in Joel Quenneville. I mean, he definitely doesn't. I mean, Mike Yo has tried to use consistent lines all year, and the only time he's changed is when he's had to. They've had 29 different lineups this year, and that's because of injury and mumps and sickness and things like that. I really do think it's a fallacy that he's changing lines. Sometimes I wish he changes more. Change the power play. We're that Wild are down 3-4-0 in Dallas the other day on a power play with Suter playing terribly, and it's same power play unit out there with no Scandella. He's willing to change the even strength, but he won't change he won't change the power play. I just think it's a fallacy. I almost wish that he would change things more in games. First question was
basically, do you
Yo's
think he's in
job.
any trouble at this point?
At this point, no. And I could say that I'm getting that from the highest of sources, and on the record again, Chuck Fletcher says tomorrow that Mike's job's not in jeopardy. And I know that the owner is not blaming this on Mike Yo. But at this point, you keep on losing.
NHL.
As kind of what Burgoyne just said, with the one, there's not a lot of guys you can move here. This is kind of an immovable roster if you're not willing to trade the young kids, and you have a lot of veterans that can't be moved. So, this is professional sports. The easiest thing to do is fire the coach. But I will say, so a lot of it can, these next 6, 7, 8 games, whatever it is, up until the All-Star break might determine a lot. If they go belly up here, maybe his job is in jeopardy. The other thing is maybe they look at it, all the excuses this year, and try to analyze that and say this is not the coach's fault. I know that's the way they feel right now. The other thing, if it was maybe me, is like if they, part of me is like I almost like would let Baxter. I know the fans don't want to hear this, and maybe some do, but if they go absolutely belly up here, I'd say go for it, man. Go for McDavid. Go for Eichel. Go get yourself for go for the first time in history, lose right. It is such the Wild way to freaking get the 9th pick after a disastrous year like this, right? Yeah. They'll figure out a
pretty little hairdo don't do what it used to. Can't disguise the living, all the miles that you've been